Hello there, it's Juliana Michaels and welcome to my channel. In this video, we're going under the sea and exploring a variety of tips and techniques for creating backgrounds, selecting color combinations, and adding color to your die cuts. I'm also sharing more tips and tricks on using the Sizzix Stamp and Spin tool to create a custom repeat pattern and a fun way to use your embossing folders with Embossing Glaze. Please feel free to use products from your stash as you follow along with the techniques I share in this video. However, if you are interested in any of the products I'm using, you can find the supply list with links in the description box below. When you shop through those links, you are supporting me, and I really appreciate that so very much. Now let's get into the making. So for this background, we're going to be working with the Sizzix Stamp and Spin tool. And before we get started on the background, I just wanted to share a few new tips that I've come up with for working with this tool. And one of them being is helping to put the grid paper in the right position and kind of get it centered on the platform. And it's got a line around here, but I was finding that if I tried to line up my sticky grid paper with that, I wasn't quite getting the patterns centered on my cardstock. So what I did was take a T ruler and I closed the platform and placed this T ruler underneath it and then lined it up so that the edge of the ruler was with the edge of the center dotted line on the turning wheel. And I then took a permanent marker and just made a little line on the edge here on each side there that you can see. And that just lets me know where the center is of the stamping wheel, so that when I do line my grid paper up, I can line the center line of that up with that line so that everything is nice and centered. So I'm going to just go ahead and peel off the liners for this and then get my paper positioned. Okay, and then we'll get the top layer off here. And now when you take your cardstock, I'm just working with a piece of watercolor cardstock, and I like to work with cardstock that's already kind of cut down to the size I'm going to use on my finished card. So this is 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches. And I've taken a ruler and marked the center of the cardstock, and then I can use that to help me line up positioning it on the grid here, so that again I get the paper and design all centered as I'm creating. So there we go. All right, so now we are ready to start the stamping. And for this I'm going to be working with the Sizzix Ocean Elements stamp set, and the ink I'm going to be using is the archival ink in Sky Blue. And when I'm starting with this, I like to start with something stamped in the middle, and for this I'm just going to use this little star, and I'm going to position it in the center of the stamping wheel, and then I'm just going to ink that up and stamp that to the center of my paper here. Yeah. And then from there, I'm just going to take one of the other images and just kind of find a position of where I'd like to put it, and start with it right there. Close that up and apply the ink. Stamp the image. And now we're going to rotate that twice. So it's going to click 2 clicks. You're going to feel kind of like where this like locks into place as you rotate it. And you're going to ink that again. And then stamp that again. And then we'll just repeat that rotate twice, ink, stamp, rotate it again. And you can do it either way. I mean, if you want to, you know, ink and then rotate, doesn't really matter. It all will work the same either way. So now once you get to this point, you can start using multiple stamps and kind of filling in the space with your design. And so we're just going to kind of play around with the placement here of where these could go, just to kind of fill in that space using some of these smaller stamps to help with that. And you just want to make sure that you don't go, that you keep the stamps between these two. So you don't want to overlap. So you wouldn't want to put anything here because that image is going to, when you rotate it, that image is going to go here. So you just kind of have to think about that a little bit as you're playing around with placing the stamps. So once you get that filled in, then you can just keep playing around with it. And then you just close that and apply your ink. And we're going to stamp that down here between that opening. Here we are. And then now we're going to rotate that and fill in this section. And yes, you'll see like some of the images won't really show up, but that's just because we're not working on a square piece of cardstock. So if you wanted to use do a square card, then you would get this same pattern repeated off, off the edges here. But we still want to fill in as much of that open space as we can. So that we're going to, make sure we do the stamping all the way around. All right, so now as you can see, we still have them open areas. So now we're going to kind of go back in with the stamps and fill in some of that open space. And if you're worried about, the ink on the stamps maybe not being dry, you can always kind of clean them off a little bit if you like with just a clear stamp cleaner, and have them ready to, so that they're not going to get any ink onto your paper. And then you can just position that to fill in. You might want to make sure it's going to fit. Because I was putting it here, I remember there's a little bubble there, so I think I'm going to put it here just to make sure. And yeah, that looks pretty good. Maybe you could put a little something here, but I don't know if it's necessary. So I think what I'm going to do is we're going to just stamp that one image here and fill in with it all the way around and just kind of see where we are once that gets positioned. And if you're not, if this is like freaking you out, practice. I did a bunch of practice patterns with this before I started filming, just playing around to see how, how it was going to work for me and what colors I liked and wanted to use for the finished card. And to do that, I just take like some kind of more inexpensive printer paper and just do the stamping on that. So there is our background. If you wanted to go back in and like maybe take this little star and fill in some little open spots here and there, again, you'd easily do that. Just stamp, close the lid, just find a spot where it fits and do the rotating like we've been doing, and off you go. So however or how much you want to fill in here is really up to you. You know, there you could certainly take that little bit of space and put another, you know, put some more shell there. There's enough ink on there to, let's get that stamp. There we go. Now with this one, obviously, it's not going to at all show on that side, so you don't need to stamp that. You can just rotate it all the way around to the opposite side, so 4 clicks, and then stamp it there. There we go. So there is a look at our finished background using the Stampin' Spin to create a repeat pattern. And as I mentioned, you can see here some of the practice ones that I did. So, you know, this is just using like a light brown color. This one is one where I did multiple colors, so this takes a little bit longer because of course you're using different ink pads and having to just kind of switch that in and out in between, but that is certainly something that you can do. This is just another practice one with the brown, and then this is a practice one that I did with the blue. So yeah, it just gives you an idea of what you can do, and I definitely encourage you just to play around with it and practice a little bit, and then if you get a pattern that you really like, you can put this paper back into your stamp wheel and line up the stamps with this to kind of use this as a template or a guide to repeat and recreate that same pattern if you really like it. Picking colors, I think, is one of the most challenging things sometimes for me, for sure, when it comes to creating, and I think probably everyone has that struggle sometimes. So I just wanted to share a little bit about how I ended up picking the colors that I used on these cards that I'm sharing in this video. And first off, I kind of started by doing a Google search online for lobsters. So I came across some images that inspired me, and then I took those and pulled out my swatch book. This is just a 6x8 album from scrapbook.com, and use these little 2x2 pocket pages to create little swatches. And if you're interested in creating something like this for your own, I do have this available as a download that you can purchase if you want to check that out. I'll have the link to it in the description box below. And so I've got, all the distress inks here, and I've swatched them onto distress watercolor cardstock, and then I also have the distress oxide inks, and I've done my alcohol inks like this, and then I need to do some more swatch pages for these are the pearls. And then I've got my archival inks swatched and some openings for some more colors as I get them. And then just another brand, this Concord and Ninth inks that I have, and I've swatched those as well. So it just gives me a resource for going through and picking colors. So with that said, I took that image that I found online and then kind of just went through my various inks, and from that then I was able to pick out some distress colors that I thought would work well. So I ended up with Salvaged Patina, Cracked Pistachio, Uncharted Mariner, Abandoned Coral, Saltwater Taffy, and Rusty Hinge. And then I was able to take these swatches of the distress inks and kind of compare them with the different archival inks that I have. And I picked out these archival inks. So I've got Viridian, Cyan, Orange Blossom, Coastal Coral, Garden Patina, Seafarer, and then I also ended up picking out the Sky Blue and this Pebble Beach. And I went with these colors because they were a little bit more of just a lighter version that coordinated well with these other more intense bright colors. And then that also helped me pick out the weathered wood embossing glaze that I use on the background of the embossed card. So just, yeah, kind of give you a little bit on my thought process. But like I said, sometimes it's a matter of like, doing some searching, of an image or like the main theme, different things like that that you can do to kind of help you come up with color combinations sometimes. All right, so now I am going to work on the background for this card, and I'm taking a piece of distress watercolor cardstock. This is cut to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inches. And then I've got the Under the Sea embossing folder from Sizzix, and I'm going to apply some watermark embossing ink. This is just Versamark watermark ink pad, but you could also use any kind of clear embossing ink or any type of embossing ink. And I'm just going to rub that over the surface of the embossing folder and kind of get a nice coverage. You can kind of tap it in. It's really kind of up to you how hard you want to push down into the, especially like with this 3D folder, because it's got all those levels of dimension to it. So like with a regular embossing folder that's doesn't have all those multiple layers, you know, you might want to just go lightly like a light rub over the top. So you can kind of play around with this. Again, I always recommend doing a test run, or at least having that in mind that, you know, if you don't like it the first time, you know, switch things up and try something different the second time. So you can kind of push down and get that ink down into the lower levels of this if you like. And then you're going to take a distress sprayer, and I'm going to spray the water onto the rough side of the distress watercolor cardstock, just to kind of help get a better impression. And then we're going to do the embossing on the smooth side. So we're going to place, so we've inked the top part of the embossing folder. We're placing it rough side down so the smooth side is up. And then you're going to close the embossing folder so that the ink is going to be on and pushed into that smooth side of the cardstock. Now for your, to do the embossing, you're going to make sure you remove the thin adapter, and then you just need the bottom plate and then just one of the cutting plates, and then you can just run that through. You can kind of put it at a little bit of an angle just to make it go through a little bit easier, and then just crank that through. If you want to run it through more than once, you can. You don't necessarily need to do that. And then we have our embossed image. Now I've got just a piece of scrap paper here, and I'm going to take my embossed and ink embossed paper. Remember that ink is still on there. And now I'm taking some weathered wood embossing glaze, which is really just a translucent embossing powder, and I'm just going to sprinkle that over the surface here. And then the powder is just going to stick wherever there is ink. Just tap off that excess. I'm going to return that to the jar. That's why I kind of like working over this piece of folded paper, because it's just easy to clean up. You still get some stray powder, but mostly gets taken care of. I'm going to just take a little Swiffer, get that off the desk here. And now I'm going to take my heat embossing gun and start heat embossing this. Once I get this turned on and get it warmed up, you'll see this powder begin to melt and be heat set. And once it starts melting, you just want to make sure you kind of keep that embossing gun moving over the surface just kind of slowly. And as you can see, as it starts to melt, it will become shiny, and then you kind of know that that area is melted, and you can kind of move on to the next section. And then once you get kind of one end done, just kind of let that cool for a second, and you can grab hold of that end, and then you can kind of hold it a little easier and continue to work on the rest of the paper. So here is a look at that heat embossed background using the Distress Embossing Glaze. So to do the die cutting on this card, I used the Ocean Medley and Ocean Critters die sets from Sizzix, and I created some panels of custom colored cardstock using distress ink and the ink smooshing technique. And I used some of those distress inks that I was showing you earlier from my when I was picking out my color combinations. So the colors I used were Rusty Hinge, Saltwater Taffy, Uncharted Mariner, Cracked Pistachio, Salvage Patina, and Abandoned Coral. And then after I made the panels, then I die cut whatever shapes I wanted to cut out of those various colors. So, you know, it's like I used the Uncharted Mariner to cut kind of the main bodies out of, the little coral from some Cracked Pistachio, and so on. So let me show you how to create one of these custom cardstock panels using the ink smooshing technique. So when I'm creating these ink smush backgrounds, I like to work on distressed watercolor cardstock because I know it can handle the ink and the water really well. And I also like to cut it down to kind of card size, and mostly I find that is usually enough cardstock to do the project I'm working on, and it's a little easier to handle than like working with like a big huge full sheet of paper and trying to smush it and get ink all over the whole surface. So I have done, you know, like a half sheet of 8.5 by 11 paper, so, you know, 8.5 by 5.5. But I kind of typically tend to cut it down more to this size, just find it a little more manageable. So to do this technique, you're just going to take your ink pad and smush it onto the craft surface. I prefer to work on these non-stick craft mats that come with the Tim Holtz glass media mat, and you can buy just the replacements of these, so it's sold separately, and you can stick it down on any surface. Like as you can see here, I've just got it on a self-healing craft mat from scrapbook.com. So then once you get your ink down on the mat, then you're just going to spritz it with water, and you want to make sure you spritz it until you like start seeing those little dots. At least that much. If you want it more of a fluid look, you're gonna spray more water. If you like those little speckly bits in your design, which I kind of like to do, then I kind of go till I at least get some little dots like this, and then that kind of helps me get more of that look. So then when you go to tap it in, I don't place the whole paper straight down into it. I kind of use my hand and kind of curve the paper and then tap like sections of it down in there. And I try not to repeat getting the same section in at this all at once, like kind of move it around and then rotate it. And then from there, if you wanted to spritz this and kind of move that around a little bit more, you can. But then you can also just at this point take your heat tool and dry this paper, or you can let it, you know, kind of sit it to the side and dry, whichever you prefer. But I like to let one layer dry and then add more, because as you are working with the inks and doing this kind of technique, when you do wet to wet, they're going to blend. So that means if this was still wet and you went back into the wet ink, it's just going to keep blending those colors. But when you do wet onto dry, so this is wet and you put it onto this dry paper, it's going to layer. So that's kind of what look I'm going for here. So, but you know, I love these like little speckly bits that you get when you do it this way. But you know, it's really kind of a personal preference. Like if you, like I said, if you don't like all those little specklies, then use a little more water, and then that'll get that ink flowing more. And now we're going to kind of try to tap into where we didn't have any ink before. And now I'm not so worried about kind of filling in those spots and getting more of like a solid coverage to the background. So, and then again, to like on this next dip, there's still ink and stuff here, which I might ink into, but then at some point I'm going to want to add a little more ink to my craft mat to get a little more coverage into those areas that are still mostly white. So again, we're mostly dry, and then I'm just going to go straight into here, and that's going to kind of pick up all those little dots of ink that were on the craft mat. You know, so if you wanted to grab those, you could do that, and then I'll give that a dry. And then I'm going to put a little more ink down here on my craft mat. And this time I might do a little more water than I did last time to kind of get that ink flowing. You can also, like, you know, Tim sometimes will have kind of run his finger through that to kind of break it up. Again, that'll kind of give you bigger puddles of ink, which just gives you a slightly different look. So it's, you know, it's really personal preference. All right, so now I'm not super worried about dots, and I'm just going to really try to just get ink onto the rest of the paper where there isn't any ink. And so now I can kind of rub it through a little bit more. It just gives you a little more flowy effect, as you can see there. But you still have all those layers that we created before this, and you can kind of still see all those little speckly dots and everything there. You know, and you can just keep repeating this process until you are happy with the way it looks. Yeah, just keep going until you're happy with it. And then another thing you can do too, like, you know, if you've got little areas where you want to get some color to particularly, you can always kind of use your finger, do a little finger painting. And I'm going to just do one more last smush into here. Just kind of pick up whatever we get. And there we are. I'll just dry that and call it finished. So there is a look at one of the ink smushed panels that you can create for your die cutting. Now, another option besides ink smushing, you could also do distress oxide ink and smush just the same. You'll get a slightly different look because of the different type of ink, but you can still do that technique with the oxide inks. Another option for the background, you could use the distress spray stains or the distress oxide sprays. You could also just do an ink blending. So take your blending brush and ink pad and apply the ink to the paper that way. Another option you can do is die cut all of your pieces from distress watercolor cardstock that's white, and then apply the ink to the die cut pieces. So you could do that same ink smushing technique, but just with the little pieces of paper die cuts, and kind of smush those into the ink. That's just another way you can do it. I do it both ways sometimes, especially if I'm not sure what colors I want to use. But again, another option for you for applying ink and color to your die cuts.
Here's a look at the 2 cards I created with the various tips and techniques I shared in this video. This first card uses the repeat pattern I created using the Sizzix Stampin' Spin tool. After I created the pattern, I used a blending brush to ink blend Uncharted Mariner Distress ink over the paper. As you can still see the stamped images. I then spritzed the panel with water to reactivate the ink and then dabbed it dry with a paper towel to lift off the ink. I then dried it with my heat tool. I assembled the die cuts using liquid adhesive and adhered them to the card using double-sided foam adhesive for some added dimension. The sentiment is stamped onto a piece of white cardstock using Seafarer archival ink. Before adding the sentiment strip and die cuts, I adhered a piece of vellum to the center of the card background and added some machine stitching around the edge. I added the vellum to help the die cuts pop a little more against the pattern background. For this second card, I trimmed the embossed background down to 4 by 5 1/4 inches and layered it onto a piece of custom colored cardstock. To do this, I took a piece of white cardstock, cut it to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inches, and used a blending brush to ink blend Uncharted Mariner Distress ink over the outer edge of the paper. There's no need to do the center of the paper because it's going to get covered with the embossed background. I then added the stamped sentiment strip and adhered the die cuts with foam adhesive to finish off the card. Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you can join me on a more regular basis. Hit the like if you enjoyed this video, and if you want to join me on my other social media platforms, you can find the links to those in the description box below. Also, feel free to leave me a comment if you have any questions or if there's something you'd love to share with me and our community. I'll see you in the comments below and in the next video. Until next time, stay crafty, my friend.